David Godman speaks. I first heard about Mastan Swami from Sadhu Om in the late 1970s. He had gone to Mastan's home village around 1960 to interview Akaladama, one of Bhagavan's earliest devotees. At that time, she was over 80 years of age. Mastan, who appeared in the Ramanatha Brahmachari chapter as the weaver who made the cloth for Bhagavan's clothes, was born in 1878 in Desur, a small village about 40 miles from Tiruvannamalai. He came from a Muslim family, but was drawn to Bhagavan by Akiladama, a widow of the village who made regular trips to Tiruvannamalai to see Bhagavan and cook for him. She was just recently recorded. A document reserved in the shrine where Mastan is buried states that at a very early age, he would spontaneously fall into a samadhi-like state while he was working on the family loom. His hands and feet, which were plying the machinery of his trade, would stop, and he would become absolutely still. His parents, Hussein and Salubi, thought that he was falling asleep on the job. Whenever they saw him in this condition, they would hit him, bring him back to his waking state, and tell him to get on with his work. These episodes seem to have been a recurring feature of his childhood. The notebook in which this story is recorded says that Mastan plunged into jnana on these occasions, making it clear that they were not just fainting fits. Mastan himself made no mention of these dramatic experiences when he described his early years. Here is Mastan's own words. I came under the spell of bhakti before the age of 20. During the Muharram festival, I would put on the garb of a pandaram, a Saiva monk, smear vibhuti on myself, carry a begging bowl, and roam around. I discovered and read the verses of the Gunagudi Mastan, a Muslim saint who probably lived during the 19th century. It occurred to me that at the following Muharram festival, I should dress up as a pandaram and sing these verses. I obtained a copy of this book, read the portions entitled Ecstatic Joy, and tried to learn it by heart. While I was doing this, it occurred to me that I should never again put on this pandaram outfit. Saying to myself, it is of no use, I should instead seek liberation. For 1 year after this decision, I didn't sleep either during the day or the night. Most of the time, I was going through Gunagudi Mastan's verses. I also went through the poems and songs of Thayuna Manabar and Patanathar. There is one verse in the Gunagudi Mastan that says, O mind, is it possible to speak of the misery and desolation experienced by those who get wedded to women? This impressed me very much. There would be no marriage for me. When I became aware that my elder brothers who were employed in the army were making arrangements to get me married, I shuddered. At the age of 15, I lost my father, and when I was 25, my mother died. After these deaths, I gave up the family weaving business. I had rupees 100 debt from this work, but a devotee paid it off for me, freeing me from this occupation. Nothing more is known about Mastan until the day he accompanied Akiladama on his first visit to Tiruvannamalai in 1914. This is how Mastan described the meeting. The first time I saw Bhagavan, he was near the mango tree that is adjacent to Jada Swami's ashram. Afterwards, I had his darshan in many caves. I often spent about a month in his presence. When I came to Bhagavan, he was seated like a rock. His unwavering gaze was filled with grace and compassion and steady wisdom. I stood by his side. After giving me a look, he opened the gate of my heart, and I was also established in his state. I stood like that for 8 hours, absolutely without fatigue, but filled with total absorption and peace. Bhagavan in those days used to open our heart with a simple, gracious look, and it transformed us. There was no need for any question, since he made us, by his look, like himself. Bhagavan himself was less restrained when he spoke of Mastan's early visits to Virupaksha cave. Bhagavan said, "Many of Sri Bhagavan's activities, utterances, and reactions were to some degree predictable. When you live in close proximity to a great being such as Bhagavan, becoming drenched in his presence and teaching, you start to believe that you understand him, at least to a certain extent. However, once in a while Bhagavan would spontaneously say things that astounded us all, making us realize how little we really knew and understood him. I remember one such statement very well. Bhagavan once told me, all sorts of beings gravitate towards the presence of a yoni. The devas, the inhabitants of the heavenly realms, the rishis and sages, the brahmanishtas, those established in Brahman, and the siddhas, the perfected beings with supernatural powers, and the yogis. Some come in a normal human form, but others turn up in their subtle astral bodies. Some of these great beings show up in the guise of beggars or madmen, and some of them even manage to appear in the forms of birds and animals. Among those who show up in a normal human body and who subsequently stay on and become devotees, there is a huge range of spiritual attainment, from complete beginners mixing with highly advanced souls. The most advanced are ripe fruits, just waiting to fall. They only have to come into the presence of a yoni in order to plunge into a deep experience of the self. One such devotee was Mastan. He was such a ripe soul. When he came to Virupaksha cave to see me, he would sometimes go into a deep samadhi before he had even entered the cave. As soon as he touched the railings of the gate, he would have a paralyzing experience of the self. He would stand rooted to the spot, unable to move for 6 or 7 hours. This happened several times. Usually these experiences would happen before he had even seen me, since I would be inside the cave, unaware of what was going on at the gate. Vishwanatha Swami said, Mastan was an entirely different category to most of the people who came. He was highly spiritual, although outwardly he looked like an ordinary man. He was a kind, generous man who was always looking for an opportunity to help other people. He never showed any self-importance. On the contrary, he liked to stay in the background, unnoticed and unappreciated by ordinary people. These samadhi states did not give him a full and permanent experience of the self. When his mind reasserted itself, he went to Bhagavan for advice, said Vishwanatha Swami. Mastan and I would come to Arunachala from our village to have the pleasure of serving Bhagavan. Mastan, a weaver, belonged to our village, but he did not stick to his craft. A man of whims, he would suddenly suspend his weaving and go to live with Bhagavan for months on end. During this time, he would keep his body and soul together on alms that he begged. In those early days, we had no buses. I would make a bundle of provisions, such as rice and pulses, and put them on his head. Loaded in this way, we would start on our journey of 40 miles to Arunachala. We would walk slowly and leisurely, telling each other stories of Bhagavan. Mastan occasionally made towels and coppins and offered them to Bhagavan, who accepted them with deep regard. Bhagavan once remarked with great joy, "Mastan's craft, though it did not give food either to him or his parents, gives me clothes." On full moon nights, we would go around the hill in the divine company of Bhagavan. In those days, there would be about 10 of us, Perumal Swami, Mastan, and a few others. On those moonlit nights, we would walk in rapture, forgetting the entire universe except for the sacred mountain. I don't think those enchanting days will ever come again. On one of those occasions, Mastan began to sing at the top of his voice. I had never heard him singing so loudly. "Mastan, what happened to you today?" asked Bhagavan as soon as the pradakshina was over. "You never ever sing, so why did you sing like that?" "It was nothing," replied Mastan casually. "Perumal instructed me that I had to sing in order to ward off your drowsiness, to raise my spirits, and to equip me for the job. He made me take a drink containing ganja." "So that's what happened. Ganja intoxication was behind your wild singing. How many times have I told you that I need no external help to keep me awake? Also, I have told you before not to do anything for my sake. Don't listen to other people who tell you differently." Though Bhagavan rebuked Mastan in this way, I don't think he took the criticism very seriously. Mastan was a very innocent man, and events like this didn't touch him. Viswanatha Swami remembers more on Mastan. I remember one incident that took place when Bhagavan lived at Skanda Ashram. A golden mongoose entered the ashram premises and made straight for Bhagavan. It sat on his lap for a while. Later, it wandered round and closely inspected all the different parts of the cave. When the inspection was over, it disappeared into the bushes on the hill. While all this was happening, Mastan was the only devotee with Bhagavan. Sometime later, Perumal Swami came back to the ashram and Mastan told him about the visit of the mongoose. One can get a glimpse of Mastan's state of mind at the time from the remarks he made. "I was afraid that the mongoose might harm our peacocks, so I kept myself ready in case it made an attack. I had a big stick handy. Fortunately, it moved away without making any move towards the peacocks." Perumal Swami told Mastan, "Mastan, you should have caught it. If you had managed to capture it, we could have brought it up here and kept it as a pet." Bhagavan was listening to this conversation. Addressing Mastan, Bhagavan said, "Whom do you think he was? Do you think you could have caught him? And do you think that this other man could have domesticated him? This was a sage of Arunachala, who took on this form to come and visit me. He wanted to pay his respects to me, How many times have I told you that sages come to see me in various forms? Mastan never told me about this mongoose. Bhagavan himself mentioned the incident to me on one of my later visits. David Godman continues, the story of the visit of the golden mongoose has been narrated in many accounts of Bhagavan's life, but this is the only version I have found which states that Mastan was the only devotee with Bhagavan at the time of the visit. Since the unusual visit took place on a busy festival day, other people were visiting Skanda Ashram, but none of the other ashram residents of Skanda Ashram was present. The mongoose had earlier visited Mastan Swami, Bhagavan's longtime attendant, in Virupaksha cave before coming up the hill to see Bhagavan. This would place the incident in 1915, the year that Mastan Swami died. When Bhagavan moved to Skanda Ashram that year, Mastan Swami stayed in Virupaksha cave, where he passed away a few months later. This is Bhagavan's own account of the visit of the mongoose. I was living up the hill at Skanda Ashram. Streams of visitors were climbing up the hill from the town. A mongoose, larger than the ordinary size, of golden hue, not gray as they normally are, with no black spot on its tail as usual of a wild mongoose, passed these crowds fearlessly. People took it to be a tame one belonging to someone in the crowd. The animal went straight to Mastan Swami. He was having a bath in the spring by Virupaksha cave. He stroked the creature and patted it. It followed him into the cave, inspected every nook and corner, and left the place and joined the crowd coming up to Skanda Ashram. I noticed it. Everyone was struck by its attractive appearance and its fearless movements. It came up to me, got on my lap, and rested there for some time. It went round the whole place, and I followed it lest it should be harmed by the unwary visitors or the peacocks. 2 peacocks of the place looked at it inquisitively. The mongoose looked nonchalantly from place to place, and finally disappeared into the rocks on the southeast of the ashram. That account was from Talks, October 1935. In 1914, shortly after Mastan had become a devotee, he and Akila Dhamma decided to open a math in the village of Dasur that would function as a sholtri, a place where visiting sadhus and pilgrims could be accommodated and fed. Akila Dhamma had been feeding sadhus prior to this date for many years, but her operations had been based in her own house. Her relatives had not approved of the amount of time, energy, and money she was devoting to sadhus, so she left her family home and found a separate house in Dasur. For many years, this was the base of her charitable activities. And around that time in 1914, an opportunity arose to have a proper math in the village of Kanapa, Mudalayer. And one of the devotees of the math came into existence. I started going to Bhagavan around 1930, having been influenced to do so by Mastan and Akila Dhamma, who both came from my village. In those days, there were only about 10 families in Dasur. We all got on very well. We were like one big family. Mastan never married, but the descendants of his family are still living in the village. I met Akila Dhamma at the Sri Ramana Mathalayam, the math in our village that was dedicated to Bhagavan. Akila Dhamma once told me about the early days of the math. Mastan, she said, helped in the construction of the math. He cleared the ground and did some of the building work himself. The math functioned as a sholtri, offering food to whoever needed it. Many of the sadhus from Ramana Ashram came to stay there, particularly when they were sick and needed someone to look after them. When the building was completed, Mastan regularly did parayana of Bhagavan's works. By this time, Mastan had more or less abandoned his career as a weaver. He lived as a sadhu and usually went out to beg his food, although sometimes Akaladama fed him. Akaladama would cook in the math. If no food was available there, Mastan would go out to beg. Whenever devotees would come to visit, Mastan would take them to the math and talk to them about Bhagavan. In 1928, Nanda Gopal Mudaliar, a local man, gave some money that was used to construct a new building on the north side of the math. A plaque was placed on the wall stating that Nanda Gopal Mudaliar had given the money for its construction. Mastan, it seems, wasn't happy with this plaque. He didn't want to live in a place that had a name other than Bhagavan's on the wall. He was so offended by this plaque that he decided to leave the math and live elsewhere. Swami Gounder, a man who lived a few kilometers away, heard about this development and invited both Akaladama and Mastan to come and stay in his village at his expense. He lived in Matam, a small village about 4 kilometers from Desur. Swami Gounder was sponsoring a math in his own village that was named after Alpar, and he expected Mastan and Akaladama to live in this place. Mastan, though, had already made it clear that he didn't want to stay in any place that was named after anyone other than Bhagavan, so he also refused to stay in this second math. As a compromise, Swami Gounder built him a small hut near the math. Akaladama decided to stay in Desur. Both of them would occasionally leave and go to visit Bhagavan in Tiruvannamalai. Sometimes they walked there, and sometimes Mastan would drive a cart loaded with provisions for the inmates of Bhagavan's ashram. When Akiladama told Bhagavan that she had opened a math in her village to serve his devotees, he said to all the devotees present, "Now our name and fame will spread over the entire country. You see this, Desurama has girded up her loins. She has set up Ramananda, Mathalayam." Saying this, Bhagavan laughed loudly. Desurama means the mother from Desur. Since Bhagavan was known to dislike publicity, his first sentence can definitely be taken to be ironic. When Bhagavan heard at a later date that Mastan had moved to the village of Matam, he asked Akaladama to move there as well to look after him. She took this as a direct command. Saying this to herself, she said, "Wherever he is, I will serve him." She went to the math in Matam. Mastan himself has recorded only one other encounter with Bhagavan, a conversation that took place shortly after Bhagavan had moved down the hill from Skanda Ashram. He writes, "For some time I was meditating at night for about an hour. I used to hear the sound of a big bell ringing. Sometimes a limitless effulgence would appear. In 1922, when I visited Bhagavan in his new ashram at the foot of the hill, I asked him about this, and Bhagavan advised me, there is no need to concern ourselves about sounds such as these. If you see from where it rises, it will be known that it arises on account of a desire, a sankalpa of the mind. Everything appears in oneself and subsides within oneself. The light, too, only appears from the same place. If you see to whom it appears, mind will subside at the source, and only reality will remain." Mastan continued to visit Bhagavan throughout the 1920s, although his visits were less frequent than in earlier years. He was present in Ramana Ashramam along with a small number of other devotees on a famous occasion in 1924 when Bhagavan was attacked by a gang of robbers who were under the mistaken impression that a large amount of money was kept there. Bhagavan received a severe blow on his leg during the robbery, but in a characteristic response he told the robbers, "If you are not satisfied, you may strike the other leg also." Ramakrishna Swami, one of the devotees present, was so outraged by the assault on Bhagavan's person, he took up an iron bar with the intention of attacking the intruders. Bhagavan restrained him, saying, "Let these robbers play their role. We shall stick to ours. Let them do what they like. It is for us to bear and forbear. Let us not interfere with them." Mastan appeared to follow Bhagavan's advice during this attack, since there is no record of him reacting in any way to the violent invasion. In one of his rare recorded statements, Mastan is reported to have said, "Even if the sky falls on your head, or even if a sword is firmly driven through your chest, do not slip from your true state." Akaladama rushed to Tiruvannamalai when she heard the news. This is her report of how Bhagavan reacted to the assault. Akaladama said, "One could not imagine what had happened. Bhagavan was beaten up by thieves. The news took wing, and many like me ran to the ashram in great anxiety. Seeing me, Bhagavan expressed surprise and said, 'Oh, Dasarama, you have come as well. Kunju Swami is telling the story over there. Go and listen.' It was though Bhagavan had directed some children to go and listen to a story that was being told some distance away. I learned that Bhagavan had appointed Kunju Swami to relate all the incidents surrounding the robbery. From his reaction, I gathered that the persistent questioning by devotees annoyed Bhagavan more than even the beatings of the thieves. Sitting at the feet of Bhagavan and stroking the wounded leg, I expressed surprise and sorrow, saying, 'How unjust! What injustice!' Then Bhagavan spoke to me. 'What injustice is there in this? As you feed me sweets, so they have fed me blows, and I have received them too. However, many times I tell you that I am not the body. It never goes into your head.' When Bhagavan described the incident, he sometimes said that he had received pusai from the thieves, a Tamil term that denotes both beating and worship. Though Mastan had only the tiniest of roles in this drama, I have included the whole piece here since it has not been told by any of the narrators in the Power of Presence series that I wrote. The math that Mastan and Akaladama ran in Dasur had been established to serve traveling sadhus, particularly those who were devotees of Bhagavan, as has been said. Mastan continued to be based in Matam until 1931, the year he passed away. He was aware well in advance of the date and time of his death, for he gave full details to Muni Swami Gounder, the man who was looking after him there. Muni Swami Gounder, though, paid no attention to the prediction. The day before he died, Mastan sent a message to all the devotees of Bhagavan who lived in his vicinity, asking them to come to see him as soon as possible. Most of them failed to arrive in time, either because they lived too far away or because they did not receive the news before it went dark. Akaladama was present when Mastan died. This is her description of his final moments. He was sick and bedridden for about a week. During those days, he spoke of many things not of this world, as if he were actually seeing them. He said, "There, Nandeswara, The vehicle of Shiva, Nandi the bull, is descending. He is very affectionately licking all over my body. Look, the Shiva Ganas, the celestial followers of Shiva, are dancing here. See? They are beckoning me to come to their world. Look at those lotus ponds where celestial swans are swimming. We thought that this was nothing but delirium, but on the last day a very strange thing happened, and we cannot lightly dismiss it as delirium. On this day he suddenly got up from his bed and stood up, looking as if someone face to face had been calling him. Then, in great excitement, he exclaimed, "Mother Apita Tukachamba," who was the consort of Shiva in the Tiruvannamalai temple, "have you come yourself to escort me?" The next moment he fell down dead. I immediately sent a message to Bhagavan. When Bhagavan learned of Mastan's passing away, he sent Kunju Swami to our village with full instructions on how to make a samadhi for Mastan. There is a Tamil book that faithfully gives the details of how saints who have followed Lord Shiva have to be buried. In accordance with these details, Bhagavan drew up a plan of the dimensions of the samadhi and sent it along with Kunju Swami. It seemed very strange to us that a Muslim should be given a Saiva saint's burial, and stranger still that Bhagavan, who did not generally encourage ceremonial rites, actually laid down in the minutest detail the rites to be followed in the samadhi of Mastan. Whatever the reason, just as Bhagavan stipulated, we made a tomb for Mastan in our village. It is a village whose population is predominantly Jain. These inhabitants of the village felt that having a Hindu samadhi in their midst would be very inauspicious. When they first heard of it, there was even talk of their abandoning the village completely. However, in the time that has passed since Mastan's samadhi was constructed, the village has thrived and grown rich. Nowadays, the samadhi is a visible deity to all people from the village, whatever their caste or religion. What a wonder! Bhagavan only ordered this type of samadhi for 3 of his devotees, his mother, Lakshmi the cow, and Mastan. Since Bhagavan publicly declared that the first 2 realized the self, one can make a strong case for saying that Bhagavan felt that Mastan was also in this state at the time of his death. If this is true, the final realization must have occurred sometime between 1924 or 22, when Mastan was still asking questions about his sadhana, and 1931, the year he passed away. Since Mastan passed away on 8th November 1931, that year, this was also the Diwali day. With Mastan's body on board, the Chapram was pushed and pulled through 3 of the local villages in a torrential downpour. One man whose uncle built Mastan's samadhi told me that at times the devotees had to maneuver the Chapram through waist-deep water. Neither the weather nor the difficulties of pushing the vehicle seemed to dampen the spirits of the funeral procession. At each place the Chapram visited, local people joined the funeral and helped to push. When the procession returned to the site of the samadhi, a funeral feast was arranged. Munaswami Gounder, who had looked after Mastan's needs for many years, donated 200 kilograms of rice and fed everyone who attended. For the rest of his life, Munaswami Gounder organized a similar-sized meal on Mastan's Samadhi Day.